after some time off from racing during the holiday season, Formula E was finally back this weekend for round 2 of the championship, and one man must have left Mexico City with a big smile on his face. Of course, I'm speaking about Oliver Rowland, because for him it was an absolute dream weekend. Even though it didn't start as one, but it clearly ended as, from my point of view, a total redemption for what happened to him in round 1 in Brazil. Only being able to qualify in P4, he later said himself that he wasn't really able to get in a good lap in the shootouts. But he was able to get clean through the start, and he could also pick up the pace in order to keep up with the leading Porsches. And even though, for the majority of the race, it looked like only one of the Porsches was able to win this race, Rowland was able to keep himself in a good proximity to them so that, if anything unfortunate for them happened, he would be able to take that chance. And that chance came pretty late in the race when David Backman crashed with Lucas di Grassi, taking the German out of the E-Prix and causing a safety car, because this gave Rowland the possibility to catch up to the 2 leading Porsches and the Andretti in front of him, while still having a little bit of attack mode left, which it activated during the green phase before. And this leftover attack mode seemed to be really beneficial for him on the restart, as he was able to overtake all 3 of them in just one lap. And the fact that it is really hard to overtake on that track made it also pretty possible for Rowland to keep his lead until the rest of the race, even though he was pretty tight in energy at the end. And from my point of view, this feels like a lot of redemption for Rowland for what happened to him in round 1, and for Nissan it is also a big relief because they could finally show that they were able to fight for wins. And even though his teammate Norman Nato wasn't able to finish in the points, I would say it was a really good weekend for Nissan, and of course for Rowland, because he was finally able to get his first win of the season. And one team that can also be pretty happy with the result of this weekend should be Porsche, even though they might have expected that they were going to finish even better. I know it's hard to finish even better than with P2 and P3 for both of your drivers, but they were really good this weekend. I mean, even in practice they were already showing what they were able to perform on this track, and especially in qualifying where they were able to fight for P2 and P1 on their own. There was no one else in the knockout stage. They both were in the final, the Costa against Rowland. This just shows how fast both of their drivers were on this track. And even though it looked like they were in control for most of the race, as soon as it came to the attack modes, they were not really able to perform the strategy they wanted. Because even though some other teams performed it pretty well, they were not really able to do that, and so Antonio Felix da Costa was overtaken by multiple guys in the middle of the race. But even this mistake didn't really affect them. They were still able to get them back into a good position, just with a little bit less of an advantage, until a safety car came out, and because both of their drivers didn't have any attack mode left, they were not able to fight against Rowland at all at the restart. And even though da Costa, who was now in P2 ahead of Wehrlein, tried everything to get ahead of Rowland once again, it just wasn't enough, and so the 2 Porsches had to settle with P2 and P3. And the weird thing is, even though it is a really good finish with P2 and P3, I mean, if you would ask any other team, they would probably take it straight away, they were still unhappy, because they thought that they could actually go for 1-2, because they were that dominant. And from my point of view, I think they might have actually been able to take home that 1-2 finish. Even though Formula E is pretty close, they were still so dominant in this race, and their pace was so good, that I think they could have actually taken an advantage onto the podium. And while we're already talking about Porsche-powered cars, we have to mention the Andrettis, because they were finally able to score some points this season. Because even though Jake Dennis was only able to finish in P4 and Nico Muller only got home in P9, it was still very good for the team compared to their double DNF in Sao Paulo. I mean, okay, a double DNF in a race weekend is not something you as a racing team run into that often, especially in the modern days. But those points are really vital, especially when you want to keep in touch with the top teams ahead of you, because you were able to see that the Andretti could actually perform really well when the car suited the track. And here, this was absolutely the case. And so it was no wonder that Jake Dennis could actually keep up with the Porsches ahead of him. And even though Nico Muller only finished in P9, I think he can also be still pretty happy about it. Because it just takes a little bit of time to get used to a new team and a new car, especially when you take into consideration that we're only in round 2 of the championship. But another team we have to talk about that has probably experienced a disaster of a weekend, especially if you consider what the expectations are, is Jaguar, because nothing really wanted to work for them this weekend. I mean, okay, Evans was able to get in a P5 finish in qualifying, which is good, but his teammate Nick Cassidy wasn't even able to get in a lap in the group stages, which left him in last place for the race. And when you remember that it is really hard to overtake on this circuit, it isn't really good when you start the race from last place. And so it is no surprise that Cassidy couldn't really overtake anyone and was only able to finish in P14. But for Evans, the race went even worse, as although he was able to keep himself in his good P5 position, he crashed on the second restart, breaking his right front suspension and taking him out of the race. And especially if you think about what Jaguar expects from itself every weekend and where they think they should finish, you can clearly say that this is an absolute horror of a weekend for them, scoring no points, while Porsche, their main rival, was able to get both of their cars on the podium, because a result like this hurts the whole team, not only their two drivers, Evans and Cassidy, but also the whole team, because this is a major disadvantage that they will have to carry now throughout the entire season when it comes to the Constructors' Championship, because from now on, Jaguar has to hope that the other main rivals like Porsche or Andretti have a similarly bad weekend in order to be able to catch up. But let's move away now from the teams and come to some driver performances from this weekend, because two drivers I would like to mention as a positive example of this weekend are Stoffel Vandoorne and Nick de Vries, because even though both of their qualifying performances weren't really that good, I mean only P13 and P14 in quali is not that good, they were both able to get into the points, giving their team a really important advantage, especially compared to other teams around them. And especially Vandoorne really impressed me with his result, because up until now it didn't really seem like he was able to get to grips with the new car and the new team really well, and such a result might actually help him get a little bit of confidence and put in those extra hours in order to understand the car even better. But I also want to praise Nick de Vries once again for this performance, because we all know that he's able to drive a car pretty fast. I mean, he's shown it in multiple other series, and now he's finally able to gain some points, which actually might help him for the rest of the season. Unfortunately, the same can't be said about Zane Maloney, even though he was able to get in a good result in qualifying. And from my point of view, this inexperience, especially with the new cars, really got the better of him, especially at the start, where he lost several places, and because, as I already said, it was really hard to overtake here, he wasn't really able to get ahead anymore. And for me, this is really unfortunate for this young guy, because even though he caused the crash with Dan Ticktum in the early stages of the race, I think he would have actually deserved some points for this good performance in qualifying. But I'm sure his time will come, and I hope that we can see many more races with him in Formula E. And one thing I'd like to mention here as well are the Mexican fans. Because even though I was only able to watch this race from my TV at home, it was still impressive to see how many people would sit in the grandstands cheering on the drivers and just having a good time. But what do you think about this E-Prix? Who are your winners and your losers from this round? Would you say that Rowland was able to get some redemption for what happened to him in Sao Paulo? And would you say that Jaguar are actually able to come back from this absolute disaster of a weekend? Let me know in the comments down below. Feel free to subscribe, and until then, I'll see you next time.